Nietzsche's Guide to Creating Your Own Values. Section 1. The Great Question. Imagine this. You wake tomorrow morning and discover that every moral belief you've ever held, every ethical principle you've followed, every value that has guided your decisions, all of it has been programmed into you by forces you never chose or questioned. The right and wrong you've lived by, the good and evil that shape your judgments, none of it truly originated within you. What would that realization do to you? Not intellectually, but viscerally. How would it feel to discover that the compass by which you've navigated your entire existence was handed to you by strangers? This is no mere philosophical thought experiment. This is the abyss that Friedrich Nietzsche stared into when he declared, "God is dead." He wasn't merely announcing the decline of religious belief, he was revealing a far more terrifying truth. The foundations upon which we built our entire moral architecture had crumbled beneath us, and most of us hadn't even noticed. You believe in human rights, in equality, in freedom, in justice. Why? From where did these concepts derive their authority? If you strip away tradition, religious mandate, social pressure, what remains to justify these values? Nothing but human invention, nothing but stories we tell ourselves. But they feel true, you might protest. They feel natural, intrinsic. And there lies the magnificent deception, that your inherited values feel like discoveries rather than inventions. The chains feel like extensions of your own body because you've worn them since birth. Consider the contradiction. You pride yourself on being an independent thinker, someone who questions authority, yet the values by which you measure your own worth, by which you determine what constitutes a good life, these you've largely accepted without question. What happens when you begin to recognize this uncomfortable truth? What happens when you feel the ground beneath your feet start to give way, when you realize that in matters of meaning, purpose, and morality, there is no cosmic authority to appeal to? This is the vertigo Nietzsche described when he wrote that we have wiped away the entire horizon. Most people will do anything to avoid looking into this abyss. They will cling to the comforting illusion that their values are somehow written into the fabric of reality. But what if this abyss is not something to fear, but something to embrace? What if this apparent catastrophe, the death of objective values, is actually an invitation to the greatest act of human creativity possible? Section 2. The Hidden Problem and its Psychological, Philosophical Roots. The hidden problem lurking beneath your inherited value system runs deeper than mere social conditioning. It's that you've been taught to forget that they were taught. This is what Nietzsche called the greatest lie, not just the specific content of our values, but the illusion that they stand on some objective foundation. Nietzsche's revolutionary insight was that our moral systems didn't evolve to discover truth. They evolved to serve human needs at particular moments in history. Consider the Judeo-Christian moral framework that still undergirds much of Western ethics. Nietzsche identified this as a slave morality, a system of values that emerged from the psychological needs of the powerless. When you valorize humility and forgiveness while condemning pride and strength, you've created a perfect moral system for those who lack power. The psychological roots of this self-deception run deep. As Carl Jung observed, humans possess a profound need for meaning in a universe that offers none. We create cultural systems that offer the illusion of permanent meaning to shield us from our cosmic insignificance. This psychological need creates what Jean-Paul Sartre identified as bad faith, a form of self-deception where we deny our fundamental freedom. We pretend our values are discoveries rather than choices to escape the vertigo of radical freedom. We act as if we are bound by moral laws that exist independently of human will, when in fact we are condemned to be free. The true hidden problem is not that your values might be wrong, it's that you've been treating them as if they could be objectively right or wrong in the first place. You've been living in what philosopher Charles Taylor calls closed world structures, frameworks that make certain questions unaskable. Even your emotions have been enlisted in this deception. The disgust you feel at certain actions, the admiration you feel towards certain virtues, these feelings present themselves as reliable moral intuitions, when in fact, they are the product of cultural programming so thorough that it has inscribed itself into your nervous system. The ultimate hidden problem is what Viktor Frankl recognized, the modern crisis of meaning. We've experienced the collapse of traditional sources of moral authority without fully embracing the creative responsibility this places upon us. Section 3. The unseen consequences. The most devastating consequence of living by inherited values isn't just that you might be following moral principles ill-suited to your nature. The true catastrophe is what Nietzsche called the death of the soul by 1,000 cuts, a slow asphyxiation of your authentic self beneath layers of borrowed convictions. Consider how this plays out daily. You wake each morning and navigate a world structured by value judgments you didn't create. You feel pride when you conform to ideals of success you absorbed rather than authored. You feel shame when you violate norms whose legitimacy you've never questioned. All the while, a quiet voice of discontent grows ever more insistent, the nagging suspicion that something essential is missing. This existential anxiety isn't a bug, it's a feature. It's your authentic self sending distress signals as it suffocates beneath borrowed values. As Nietzsche wrote, the individual has always had to struggle to keep from being overwhelmed by the tribe. If you try it, you will be lonely often and sometimes frightened, but no price is too high to pay for the privilege of owning yourself. What makes this process so insidious is that the false values don't announce themselves as foreign invaders. They disguise themselves as your own thoughts. They speak in your mental voice. The cognitive bias known as the illusion of explanatory depth ensures that these inherited values feel like self-evident truths rather than contingent cultural constructs. The longer you live by unexamined values, the more your life becomes what existentialist philosophers called inauthentic. You build relationships based on shared values that neither you nor your partners have truly chosen. You pursue career paths that align with success metrics you've absorbed rather than created. You become what David Reisman called other-directed, a person whose sense of self derives primarily from conformity to external expectations. The ultimate unseen consequence is a profound form of unfreedom that masquerades as choice. You believe yourself free because you can choose between options A, B, and C, without recognizing that the truly transformative possibilities exist outside the alphabet you've been taught. Section 4. The Rebellion: How to Break Free. The rebellion begins with a dangerous question. What if everything I've been taught to value is merely one possibility among countless others? Nietzsche called this process philosophizing with a hammer, testing each of your values by striking it to see whether it rings hollow or true. The first act of rebellion is what Nietzsche called the death of God, recognizing that nothing external to human will can justify our moral frameworks. This recognition creates space for active nihilism. Unlike passive nihilism, which collapses into despair at the absence of inherent meaning, active nihilism embraces this absence as the precondition for authentic creation. How do you enact this rebellion? Begin by practicing phenomenological reduction, systematically suspending judgment about your inherited beliefs to see what remains when their assumed authority is removed. Ask of each value, what function does this serve? Whose interests does it advance? What forms of life does it make possible or impossible? The rebellion requires embracing what Nietzsche called amor fati, love of fate, not as passive acceptance but as creative transformation. My formula for greatness in a human being, he wrote, is amor fati, that one wants nothing to be different, not forward, not backward, not in all eternity, not merely bear what is necessary, but love it. The practical path unfolds through three transformations that Nietzsche described. First, you become the camel who kneels to bear the weight of existing values, studying them thoroughly. Then you become the lion who creates freedom by saying a sacred no to inherited duties. Finally, you become the child who says a sacred yes to existence and begins the work of genuine creation. This creation isn't arbitrary. Nietzsche wasn't advocating moral relativism. He proposed a standard for evaluating values. Do they affirm life or deny it? Do they emerge from strength and courage or from weakness and fear? Do they enable human flourishing or do they constrain our highest possibilities? The greatest misconception about Nietzsche's approach is that it leads to moral chaos. In fact, creating your own values demands greater responsibility than inheriting them. When you recognize values as your creations rather than cosmic mandates, you can no longer blame God, nature, tradition, or society for your moral choices. Section 5. The Ultimate Truth, the Final, Most Powerful Realization. The ultimate truth that Nietzsche leads us toward is both simpler and more profound than most realize. There is no ultimate truth. There is no final destination. There is no end state of perfect value creation that once achieved would allow you to rest in certainty. This is what Nietzsche meant by eternal recurrence, his most challenging concept. It's an existential thought experiment. If you had to live your life with all its pain and joy infinitely many times, exactly as it is, could you affirm it? Could you say yes to existence without appeal to some future reward or cosmic purpose? This is the heaviest weight. The recognition that the creation of values is not a task to be completed but a process to be lived. The moment you treat your created values as fixed truths, you've fallen back into the old pattern of seeking authority beyond yourself. As Nietzsche wrote, the snake which cannot cast its skin has to die, as well the minds which are prevented from changing their opinions, they cease to be mind. The values most worth creating are precisely those that remain open to revision, that contain within themselves the seeds of their own transformation. This isn't relativism. It's the recognition that life itself is a process of perpetual becoming rather than static being. To be authentic isn't to discover some fixed, essential self that was always there. Authenticity means embracing what Nietzsche called becoming who you are, an ongoing process of self-creation through which you continually outgrow your previous selves. Each value you create serves as a ladder to climb and then kick away. The ultimate truth is that truth itself, at least in the realm of values, is not something to be discovered, but something to be created. Your values are not mirrors reflecting reality, but lenses shaping how reality appears to you. The question is not whether these lenses are true in some absolute sense, but whether they reveal aspects of existence that enable you to live with greater intensity, creativity, and affirmation. The truly radical step is to embrace what Nietzsche called philosophizing with the dawn. A perpetual beginning, a constant rebirth of questioning, a joyful skepticism that sees each answer as the seed of new questions rather than a final resting place. The practical implication is profound. The goal is not to arrive at a perfect set of values, but to develop the capacity for perpetual value creation in response to the ever-changing demands of life. This doesn't mean nihilistic relativism where anything goes. It demands what Nietzsche called intellectual conscience, a rigorous honesty about the provisional nature of all values, coupled with an absolute commitment to creating the best values possible. The secret for harvesting from existence the greatest fruitfulness and the greatest enjoyment, wrote Nietzsche, is to live dangerously, build your cities on the slopes of Vesuvius, send your ships into uncharted seas. This is not a call to destructive chaos, but to the highest form of human creativity, the ongoing creation of values that make life not merely endurable but joyful, not merely meaningful but beautiful. It's an invitation to transform the catastrophe of groundlessness into the miracle of freedom. It's a recognition that in a universe without inherent meaning, the meaning you create becomes all the more precious precisely because it is yours. If this exploration of creating your own values has sparked something within you, consider this just the beginning of your journey. Subscribe to continue this philosophical adventure with us, and join a community of fellow travelers questioning inherited assumptions and forging authentic paths. Remember, in Nietzsche's words, become who you are. The canvas awaits your unique creation. The values most worth living by are the ones you consciously craft through courageous self-examination and bold experimentation. Your life is not a problem to be solved, but a work of art to be created. Like, share, and comment below with your thoughts. How will you begin testing your inherited values with the philosopher's hammer?